Hello, this is a video to have a look at the overview of a CPU, looking at the main components of the CPU. We will look at the purpose, the functions and the characteristics of the CPU. So first of all, what is the purpose of a CPU? The CPU carries out the processing of the computer by fetching, decoding and executing instructions. We call this the fetch, decode, execute cycle. It is often referred to as the brain of the computer because the CPU does all the thinking, all of the processing that the computer needs. So let's look at the main components. The main components of the CPU are the control unit, the arithmetic logic unit, often abbreviated to the ALU, and the cache. First, let's look at the control unit. So the control unit has a very important job. It controls the input and output of data, as well as the flow of data around the CPU. The ALU is the part of the computer which completes calculations, for example, addition and subtraction, and also logic functions such as checking if values are greater or less than each other. The CPU will have some memory called the cache. Accessing instructions from the main memory is very slow. This would restrict the performance of the CPU. The cache memory is a very fast piece of memory, but it's also quite expensive, where blocks of instructions can be copied from a memory into the cache so the CPU can access it quickly. The data can be replaced or written back to main memory if needed. The main characteristics of a CPU are the clock speed and the number of cores the CPU has. So first of all, the clock speed is a measure of how fast the CPU is. We measure the clock speed in hertz, which is 1 cycle per second. We know that a CPU fetches, decodes and then executes 1 cycle of instructions when it's processing, so 1 hertz will do 1 of these cycles per second. Modern day CPUs may be clocked at 3 GHz, for example, and 3 GHz means 3 billion cycles per second, so it can process quite a lot. The other part of a characteristic of CPU is the number of cores it has. Now, modern computer systems will have multiple cores in their CPUs. For example, dual core, which means it has 2 cores, and quad core, which means it has 4 cores. Each core can execute instructions simultaneously and independently of each other. However, it isn't the case that a dual core processor would be twice as fast as a single core. It would perform a lot faster. However, there is a lot of factors that you have to take into account when looking at the speed of a CPU. So generally, the more cores a CPU has, the better it will perform. So overall, we've looked at the control unit that controls the flow of data, the ALU, which performs calculations and logic, the cache memory, where instructions can be copied to store for quick access by the processor, and generally, the higher the clock speed, larger the cache, and the more cores a processor has, the better it will perform.